Okay, so a quick disclaimer before we get into this video. This movie is really dark. The movie made me very uncomfortable, and in this video I'm going to dive into all of the story, and this video is going to spoil everything. Hey guys, welcome back. Today let's talk about Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. So Redeeming Love is a Christian book published in 1991, and the movie just came out in January of 2022. And honestly, going into this movie, I should have known it wasn't going to be a great movie because it's a January release, and we all know that the worst movies are released in January. But I saw the trailer for this a few months ago, and I knew that it was based on a book, and I knew I needed to see it because the trailer was really cheesy, and it looked kind of like your typical, gushy romance movie. And my husband saw it, and he was super on board for going, and we thought it would be a great movie to go and poke fun at, but holy shit, we were wrong. This is one of the darkest movies I have ever seen in theaters. This movie was literally like a 70s exploitation film. How this got a PG-13 rating is beyond me. We were watching this movie and we were honestly shocked with the content. I didn't know much about the story, the nitty-gritty of it, before we went. And so I had started the book prior to going to the movie, but I had barely started it, and I didn't want to wait to finish the book before going to see the movie. I was afraid that it wasn't going to be popular enough to stay in theaters long enough for us to go see it by the time I had finished the book. So because of this, I really had no idea what was in store for us when we were going into this, and now, looking back, I really feel like we should have been more prepared. Redeeming Love takes place during the California Gold Rush era in the 1800s, and we have our main character, Angel, and she's a prostitute, and my God, she has had a hell of a life. After the movie, I came to the conclusion that when the author was writing this, I feel like she was just writing and she's thinking of all of these crazy messed up things. And she's like, yep, this character is going to have every horrible thing done to her that I can possibly think of. Honestly, with how the movie was going, I'm surprised the author didn't have her die of some horrible sex-related disease in the end instead of the happy ending that we got. So I'm going to go through the major plot points of this story and of Angel's life. But before I do that, I have to explain our main male lead, Michael Hosea. In the movie, he asks God for a wife, and then the next day he's in town and he sees the town's finest prostitute and is like, oh yeah, future Mrs. Hosea. And then proceeds to buy time with her, to talk to her, and tries to convince her to marry him. So that is the love story in the movie. And in the movie, the storyline is told by alternating from the present with glimpses into Angel's past to explain her childhood. So with this, I'm going to start with her childhood. She is the daughter of this random man and his mistress. Her father doesn't want to acknowledge her existence, and then when she's 8, he cuts her and her mother off, and then her mom is forced into prostitution so that they can survive. Shortly later, her mom dies, and she takes her last breaths right in front of Angel. Angel is taken by her mother's boyfriend, who decides to sell her to a brothel when she was 8. The pimp of this brothel, his name is Duke, he has his goon kill this man, the man that sold her, right in front of Angel, and forces her to watch. So Duke, the pimp of this brothel, is also a pedophile who abuses Angel. Then when Angel is of age to start being a prostitute, her first customer is her dad. And after she knows it's her dad, after they have sex, she then tells him that she's his daughter, and then he offs himself. So add incest to this list of all these terrible things that have happened to this girl. Then later, in unrelated to the dad sex, I think, Duke forces her to have an 1800s style abortion. Then you think things are kind of turning around for her. She escapes this brothel. She gets on a boat to California. But on the boat, she starts a prostitution ring with other women on the boat. And then once they get to California, she gets beaten and robbed by these same women. And then she gets picked up by a lady who goes by Duchess, where she gets taken to another brothel where she becomes the most sought after prostitute in this new town. And in this town, they have a lottery drawing daily for which dude out of this crowd gets a turn with her, because everyone in town wants a turn. And then this is where we enter Michael, who is just paying for her time just to try and convince her to marry him. And she is super not into it. So then, and I'm only like halfway through, like the bad times just like keep on coming. So she is in this brothel and she gets beaten and raped by the Duchess's bodyguard guy. And in the movie, her face is legit like pulpy. Like the makeup did a really great job with making her very hard to look at after her beating. So Michael, the man on a mission, comes and he pays off the Duchess, and the Duchess is like, get her out of here, she's enough trouble. So Michael takes Angel back to his farm to be his wife, and once her face is healed, she decides she's going to go back to the brothel where she got the beat out of her and get the money that's owed to her, as if that's going to work. Like, do you really think that you're gonna go back to this brothel and be like, give me what I'm owed? They're just gonna beat the out of you again. So she runs away from Michael and only makes it like a mile down the road before he chases her down on horseback, and he's like, well, it's your choice if you want to go back, but I want you to come back with me, blah, blah, blah. So he leaves, and then later that night, she's back, because obviously, why would you go back to the brothel versus this nice new farmhouse with your nice farmer husband? Then Michael's brother-in-law, Paul, shows up. And Paul's been having a rough life since his wife died. And he says some comments to Angel like, I recognize, to Michael, and he's like, I recognize your whore wife. And then Michael hits him, and then they make up, and Michael's like, I want you to get help. You haven't been the same since sister died. So Michael sends Paul to town to get supplies so that he can kind of like get back up on his feet. So Angel hitches a ride to town with Paul. Partway through the ride, they're stopped and they're eating, and he's like, you need to pay me for the ride. And then she proceeds to pay him the only way she knows how. So we're back in town, and Angel goes to the brothel to get her money. She sees that it's burned down, and this other town pimp comes up to her and is like, heyo, you looking for work? And she's like, yeah. Then 5 minutes later in the movie, Michael tracks her down in this new brothel where she's with a guy, and he's like, do you want to go home? And she's like, yeah. So he leads her down the stairs and uses his like Jesus powers to beat up these 3 men that were trying to stop them. So they successfully escape. He brings her back home. We're back home. And then we have this really uncomfortable scene of her in the river washing herself with rocks, and he stops her and like, I don't know, and then they start having like a nice time kind of together and like getting to know each other, and they're growing closer and like kind of falling in love, where this like romantic movie like kind of should have been going. Like, gosh, this movie was so dark. It had so much, like I can't even like, with all the stuff she went through, this was not a fun watch. But anyway, they should be falling in love, and we should be like wrapping up the story at this point. Like what else can actually happen? At this point in the movie, they add like 5 new characters to this story. We have this family with a pregnant wife who starts living with them. And then Angel decides that their 15-year-old daughter, 15-ish, she looked young, But she decides that this daughter would be a better match for Michael, and then she leaves him again. This time though, he's like, damn, I am done chasing her. She'll come back. Because of course she'll come back, because this life is way better than the shitty life she had. So she ends up going to a different city and she starts being a baker at this shop. And then of course, the pedophile pimp from earlier and his goon just happened to find her. They'd happened to be in the same town, and we have this scene of the goon like walking by the shop and looking through the window and seeing her and being like, what? And it's like, why do we care that this woman that literally ran away years ago is off living a different life now? But whatever. So they burn down this shop and then they take her, and Duke has this new brothel in this new town. So he takes her and it's just like, oh, you're back in business. And then she sees that he has not stopped his pedo ways. So she goes on stage to like perform. And while she's up there, she tells the whole crowd that he fucks kids, and then they lynch him and she escapes. Thank God. So then it's like, at this point, we're like, okay, so are you going back to Michael now? Because obviously you probably shouldn't have left him in the first place. You had it pretty good there. He's a nice guy. You had everything you needed. You were being taken care of. He didn't care about your past. But no, she escapes. And then the thing pops up on the screen being like 3 years later. And I'm like, okay. So we learn that she is now like, I don't know if she started it or she's now working at this place for like women to start over that have had the past that she has. So she's doing well for herself. She's found Jesus. She's making peace with her past. And then Paul tracks her down, the guy from earlier that forced her to pay for the wagon ride. And he's like, you need to come home because Michael's still waiting for you. And apparently she assumed that Michael just married the 15-year-old, and I think that's why she didn't go back to him. But it's like, oh, come on. So we learn that Paul, bad guy Paul, sleazeball Paul, married the 15-year-old, which now I'm assuming she's 15. She looked young, but it's years later. But they're married and she's pregnant. But Paul and her have a moment where he apologizes. And I actually have to say that the actor of Paul did a really good job during that scene. Like, he was crying and like, you could tell he was acting, man. But so basically Paul's like, I'm going back to the farm tomorrow, come or don't come. And so you have the scene of Paul getting on the wagon and he leaves, and you assume like, oh, she didn't go back, she decided to stay, keep her life or whatever. And then you have the scene of her and Michael reuniting at the farm, and it's actually a very nice moment, I do have to say. So I forgot to say, so this whole time, every single time she would run away, she would take off the ring, and it would have these dramatic moments of like it sitting on top of a Bible, or it sitting here, or her wrapping it up and giving it to the 15-year-old girl and being like, marry Michael. But so this time he's like, leave it on. Like, he's like, don't leave again. And she's like, I won't. And it's like, good. So it ends and it's a happy ending, and we have scenes of them being happy, lovey, and she's pregnant and they have a kid and they're living a good life. Thank you. So glad that this poor girl got her happy ending, because she lived a rough life up until that point. That's the movie. It was long. This was like a 2 hour and like 15-minute movie, and it felt like it. We left the theater being like, what did I just watch? This was one of the like darkest, most unfun movies I have ever seen in theaters. About like 35 to like 45 minutes into the movie, like we're just consistently sharing glances back and forth, like of shock, like regarding what we're watching. Like, I can't believe that this is happening right now. Like, honestly, if we were watching this at home, I would have 100% not finished it. So after seeing this movie, I was like, I don't want to finish this book, especially because I was only partway through this incredibly long prologue. The prologue, it said my reading time on to finish it was like 45 minutes, and I was like, no, thank you. But then the next day I woke up and like curiosity prevailed, and I made it to like 25% into reading the book the next day, mainly because I was curious. And then I got to the 25% mark, and then I was like, I'm good. Like I decided not to continue reading it. But from the 25% of the book that I did get through, there are just like a few big differences between that part of the book and the movie that I do want to point out that I actually think needed to be placed into the movie that would have made the movie make a lot more sense. So this is a very Christian book. And for the movie to make it more mainstream for a broader audience, they toned the Christian aspect of the story way down. Now, normally I wouldn't complain about that. I don't consume Christian media, and normally it would have been a positive thing for me to have the religious aspect of this movie toned down. But after reading the book, we have many passages of Michael and God literally talking to each other. And suddenly, like storytelling wise, it made so much more sense as to why he was so obsessed with wanting to marry Angel. In the movie, it's more of kind of a passing thought of him being in a church near the beginning of the movie and being like, talking to God and praying and being like, I want a wife. And then next time he's in town, he sees Angel, and she is literally the first woman he sees in town. And he's like, okay, great, let's go with her. And this is my husband's biggest complaint with the movie. For me, I didn't like all these horrible things that were happening to this girl. Like, it was just very uncomfortable. But for him, his main biggest complaint with this movie was he didn't understand why Michael was so obsessed with being like, I have to marry Angel. She's the one, she's the one, she's the one. When she was very against it the whole time, she kept running away. And Michael was the most patient person ever. He was so kind, and he was so forgiving, and he was so nice to her. But the whole time you're watching it, you're like, leave her alone. She clearly doesn't want to be with you. So it didn't really make any sense like why he was so persistent. But in the book, this part of the story made more sense because you literally have this dialogue of God being like, Michael, you're going to marry Angel, like she's the one. So in the book, we have this passage where he is leaving the brothel after she's rejected him again. And Michael is like, why her? Why her? Like, he's actually questioning it, which he should be. But we have these passages, and in the book, she would highlight God's voice in black italics, and then Michael would talk back to him, and it would be normal italics. So in the book, we start, and he says, Michael, forget it. Just forget I ever asked for a wife. I don't need one that badly. Michael, I'll stay celibate. Michael, beloved. He kept walking. God, why her? Tell me that. Why not a gently reared girl, untouched until her wedding night? Why not a God-fearing widow? Lord, send me a plain woman, kind and enduring, someone who would work at my side in the fields, plowing, planting, and harvesting, someone who will get dirt beneath her fingernails but doesn't have it already in her blood, someone to give me children, or someone with children already if it's not in your plan for me to have my own. Why do you tell me to marry a harlot? This is the woman I have chosen for you. Michael stopped, furious. I'm no prophet, he shouted at the darkening sky. I'm not one of your saints. I'm just an ordinary man. Go back and get Angel. It's not going to work. You're wrong this time. Go back. So they're having a conversation, and he's like, go get her. And so it makes more sense why Michael, again, why he was so obsessed and being like, no, Angel, come with me, because God is literally like, do it. So another difference in the book, Michael decides to call her Mara instead of Angel, because she's like, you can call me whatever you want, when he's like, what's your real name? Because I know obviously Angel isn't your real name. And so he decides to call her Mara because we learned that Mara is a biblical name, but they completely cut that from the movie. And then there's also a section where Michael tells Angel, like, she's back at his house for like after her vicious beating, and after Michael like paid the Duchess to keep her, whatever. So he is telling Angel about the prophet Hosea, which is also his last name, and how God told this Hosea prophet to go and marry a prostitute, and about how she kept running away from him and going back into prostitution, which is exactly what Angel was doing during the movie. So apparently this book is basically a retelling of this Bible story, but it would have been nice if in the movie they would have given us a nod to that, or if they would have had like a part from the book where Michael and her are having this conversation. I don't remember this happening. I don't know if maybe when I was whispering to my husband it actually happened and I completely missed it. And I don't know if they thought just giving him the last name of Hosea, suddenly everybody should just know about this prophet. But knowing the story about the prophet, it doesn't seem completely crazy for her to keep running away so many times, because it's literally a retelling. So if you went into this movie knowing that it's a biblical retelling, or having read the book prior, or knowing the connection between his last name and this prophet, it would have made a lot more sense. But since they made this movie mainstream to try to appeal to a broader audience, they took away from what the book was originally about. So then you have people like me and my husband who know nothing of these Bible stories, and the whole time during this movie we're like, what is going on? Like, in my opinion, if you are going to make a Christian film, go full-fledged and make a Christian film. Don't make this weird exploitation Nicholas Sparks love child type movie. This was just much better off being a full-fledged religious movie. Now, I do have to give credit where credit is due. This movie was really well shot. The camera work, the set, the costumes, the lighting, everything did just look so good. And also the actors in this movie were acting their hearts out. Abigail Cohen, who played Angel, and Tom Lewis, who played Michael, they were amazing. They did so good with their roles. And like, honestly, like there wasn't a single character, including like extreme side characters, where I was like, you know, like, they don't really seem like they want to be here. All of these people were giving it their all, and they were all very believable in their roles. And I do very genuinely hope that they get more acting gigs, because their acting was the best part of this movie. So this movie was a trip, to say the least. I really do not see how this movie was rated PG-13. Like I said in the beginning, it was way darker than I was expecting, and I would definitely not feel comfortable with a 13-year-old watching this movie. And like, even for myself, I am not eager to rewatch it at all. So if you saw this movie, let me know what you thought of it in the comments down below. Thanks for spending your time with me for this spoiler talk. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye!